I'm retired Marin County Fire Department dispatcher Jim Mann, and welcome to part 3 of our series about the Marin County Fire Department. We've previously introduced you to retired Chiefs Stan Rowan, Jim Selfridge, and Ken Mizuko. Last time they narrated their experiences during the 1995 Vision Fire. We also learned about the advent of the paramedic program within the Marin County Fire Department.
And I'm retired Fire Chief Paul Smith. In this final episode, we'll talk with the chiefs about the sometimes challenging development of today's very successful mutual aid plan. And we'll finish with a fascinating look at the evolution of their fire dispatch center in Whitaker, a place well known to our co-host Jim Mann. We hope you've enjoyed this series on the Marin County Fire Department, and thank you for your interest in Marin County fire history.
I think it's important, kind of shifting gears a little bit and talk about how mutual aid and automatic aid has shifted from what it was back then to what it is today. Extremely jurisdictional, and Stan and Jim can certainly add to this, where you never went into anybody else's jurisdiction without permission. And it caused a lot of issues between departments if that happened. To where we're at today, where basically it's the closest resource response based on standards of cover that incorporated critical tasking, speed and weight of our delivery system. Far better. I mean, I can remember fires that I went to where it was solely Marin County Fire Department equipment, fully involved structure fire and forest knolls, where we didn't have the staffing to go ventilate the roof. So the interior crew is just taking a pounding. But today we're getting 2 Ross Valley engines off the bat. And, our fire ground operations tactically, strategically, firefighter safety wise are so much better. And, but Jim and Stan, maybe you can talk about some of the jurisdictional issues and the development of mutual aid and how that worked.
The best example I can give you of how bad it was back in the old days, Ken alluded to earlier, a lot of times we worked up by ourselves on stations. In 1970, I was working alone in Marin City, had the only type 1 in the department, and Marin Joe's restaurant was within Marin City's jurisdiction. It was outside of the city limits of Corte Madera. And we got a report of a roof fire at Marin Joe's. I jump in the engine, come flying up there, and was like, go by Marin Joe's on 101 to take the turnoff to come back down Casa Buena. I see a Corte Madera engine parked right in front of Marin Joe's with about 3 or 4 guys on the tailboard and a cook up on the roof with a garden hose. And these guys in the Corte Madera engine were just watching. And when I pulled up, they drove away. I mean, that's how bad it was in the old days.
Corte Madera was one of the last holdouts of that. Santa Fe was touchy at times, but then they annexed part of the land. Fairfax was all right. Ross Valley, when it became Ross Valley, they wanted to get paid for coming in our calls. I believe they still get money for that. It was interesting.
We did a little piece on that in Marin Fire History. And for folks like Ken and I were on the back side of that, we're basically shaking our heads. I mean, you guys pretty much lived it, it's and the earliest document I found was from the 1930s with Mill Valley Fire, Cal Park Fire Department, and Kenfield and Fairfax. They signed, with their board's council's permission, mutual aid. But what they did back then is that the officer on duty had to radio or telephone the other department and say Kenfield would call on the telephone to Fairfax and say, hey, the fire chief wants you guys to respond to our jurisdiction. That's how it was back in the 30s. And then I think that went to sleep for a while.
Yeah, I mean, there were some definitely crazy things that we used to do years ago. And it was just the philosophy back then. I remember that when I came to work, that you didn't load the dozer until the chief got on the scene and said, let's start the dozer to the fire, And Woodacre had one of the only Hirsch tools in the whole county, and we traveled the county, every weekend, going to different vehicle accidents throughout the county. Probably looking back, one of the craziest things we did was when we had the fire station in Santa Venetia, was at a home on Meadow Way in Santa Venetia. Whenever that station went on a call, we covered that station code 3 from Woodacre. And sometimes, it was 2 or 3 times a day that we would go code 3 from Woodacre to Santa Venetia, passing 6 fire stations to cover our station. And it just shows you the improvement, looking at Marin County Fire as a regional fire department. And even though it's still several individual departments, really acts as one operationally every day, which is a huge improvement.
Comment on mutual aid, when we knew that when we called Kentfield, we got sometimes 10 or 11 guys on the engine. I think one of them fell off one day, but I remember the fire up here on D. White's Hill Peak up here. I don't know what year that. God knows what year that was.
That's the one with you running away with the radio in your hand.
Rancho.
Tim Rancho.
But that was, we knew to call Kentfield, we got manpower because we were making long hoseways down.
Well, even when I came to work, I mean, a lot of the other departments didn't come to Marin County Fire Department fire, with the exception of Kentfield.
Non-Marin County Fire Department that went to wildfires in this county was Kentfield with your OES engine. And it was usually stacked with guys. So it was a very valuable resource for us. I mean,
Volunteer. There was always a couple of guys hanging out during the day. And we knew if we were down hanging out at the station at 3 o'clock on a September afternoon, we might see something.
I think the Shalano Valley fire in 65, I guess it was, we got a Larkspur engine, a Novato.
I think you got engine 3 or international
The
with Bob Mariani.
Yeah, and I think that's what our mutual aid was at the time. That's what we got, because there was no CDF resources available.
That was a hell of a fire.
Sure
I
was.
read about that. That was a hell of a fire. It really ran.
northeast wind.
See, and there was a good example of a policy that no one could do anything until something was seen, the radio back, and then maybe the things would start rolling from other departments. But that particular night, we had engines in Sonoma County. The 65, it was the Tamales engine. Then Shalano Valley went to Tamales to cover Tamales. Water tender, I guess, was there water tender at Hicks?
Yeah.
One of the CCKWs, I think. They went, and the dozer went. The dozer was sitting in Roanoke Park when that fire. So it was really, I guess people got nervous then. We get a lot of help. The first engine on scene was, I believe, the power of Woodacre's Power Wagon that was already at another call or something. With Mr. Your wonderful neighbor he was the first engine in. And I was sitting there.
World's best firefighter,
World's
world's
best
greatest, yeah.
And then a couple more engines came and it was a slow process, but the wind was blowing. It was just like those other fires that happened in the 64 and 65. Roma had a lot of fires going. But we had no CAL FIRE response to that fire in China Valley at all.
We were busy.
And it started out by the Portuguese Hall, just up the
Oh,
street
yeah.
from the Portuguese Hall on in west of Petaluma, and then it jumped Spring Hill. Went,
You're not-
and by that time I was in that ranch. I don't know whose ranch out today. I don't know. You drive in there. I told him it was 2 miles wide. I probably exaggerated a little bit, and I said it would be here. It would be in Marin in 15 minutes. Before I got back to the pavement, it was starting to jump by the school, that Laguna School in China Valley. And that's when we started getting the China Valley truck got back, power wagon showed up.
Some water on it.
Water on it. But then the wind took it right to the base of Wilson Hill
Yeah.
and stopped.
Okay.
Then but we did lose a house after that. Later in the morning, we lost, because that was leaves. When I left here, the leaves were 3-4 feet off the ground, flying through the air. I've never seen anything like that. The wind was unbelievable. I don't remember the ride out there. It was by myself. I don't remember. I remember when I got to top of Wilson Hill to see that glow. It was rather impressive,
Yeah, that was.
and nobody knew there was fire there before. So.
Interesting piece of trivia is if you look at the fire history of Marin for major catastrophic fires, there has never been one unless the northeast or east winds were blowing, ever. If you look at the whole history going back to documented history to, the early part of the last century and in the late 1800s, you can go to, and if you can get to the weather data, you'll see that every major catastrophic fire, there was a northeast wind blowing. The only big fire I remember that didn't, and it was terribly catastrophic, where it wasn't a northeast wind, was that Black Canyon fire in '64. That was fuel and slope driven fire.
But, it's probably a good segue to talk a little bit about something that's plagued the department. I'll use plague because I think it's been there for years. It's kind of like something that never goes away that we keep dealing with, but the dispatch issue. And I know Stan dealt with it, I dealt with it, Jason's dealing with it. And the reluctancy to give up dispatch because of that command and control piece. But maybe Stan, you can talk about some of your issues you had with dispatch as far as the county trying to prompt you to go into ComSec.
Well, I don't think I had as many battles as you did. I think your 10 years, you had more battles than my 20 years as far as dispatch. But you're right, that was the major problem.
I've always, when I was a firefighter, was in a unique position to call out here. Now, Jim Mann, I was hoping Jim Mann would see us today because he's got a lot of perspective from dispatch here. But we go back to the same thing. Unless you understand how fire command and control operates, you have to know that the best place for command and control the emergency operations centers probably at fire headquarters.
And because we're a contract county and the CDF is so integral to this operation, it just will never work with the cops.
Right.
And, and even if it were to get moved down there and some cop comes, yells over the radio, shots fired, fire is going to take a backseat to everything. And that's,
Yes, and
we can't afford that.
no, that's, and there we are back to the same point as fire service leaders. I looked at our job, and Ken did a phenomenal job on teaching and bringing along our constituency, our leaders, our electeds to understand why we need it, how we need it. We're not full of crap. We know what we're talking about. And that's hard. Once you get past that with DPW, or like you mentioned before with your fire equipment replacement program, oh, it's easy peasy, 1, 2, 3 now, compared to what it was in 1970.
I don't remember who the sheriff was, but Dick Pedroli was the chief, whether it was Montanus or the Hallenstein, maybe Hallenstein, because Larry Kelly was the undersheriff, and they made a big push to get our dispatch. Yeah, I mean a huge push, and Dick asked me to debate Larry Kelly in front of the board, and I did, and it was quite a long debate about why I should stay at Woodacre and not go to the sheriff's department. And I'll never forget. Gary Giacomini leaned over to John Barrows, who was then the county administrator, and he said, "Do not ever bring this issue back before this board again." Well, I mean, John Barrows eventually left, and it. So we had a little bit of peace for a few years until the administration of the Civic Center changed, and we had to start fighting that battle again.